Good morning, church. I am excited to talk with you today, church, about a message that we want to share of good news. And to begin that, I thought we'd start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a slow-moving turtle. Now, this was a kind and wise turtle, but running was definitely out of his wheelhouse, which would not have been an issue except that there was this rabbit that kept ribbing him on and on about how slow his pace was. The rabbit ran like the wind. It was almost miraculous how fast that rabbit could run, and so it knew that it would beat the turtle in anything that had to do with running. Well, over and over it bothered the turtle consistently, till finally one day that turtle says, "Fine, I'm going to race you in a race, and we'll see who's the fastest." Well, the hare was definitely surprised and thought, okay, this is going to work for me. That day came, and I imagine that the little tortoise in the morning was really afraid of why he had said yes. But he faced his fear, and he started the race. Well, as predicted, the hare sped off, bypassing the turtle with not even a second. So long went the race, and the rabbit was so far in the front that it said, you know what, I'm clearly winning this. I might as well take a nap and be refreshed for my win. So the rabbit lied down. Well, the tortoise kept moving at that slow pace it was moving at, going on and on and on. The turtle was far behind, but with each snore of the hare, the tortoise moved closer to victory. Finally, the turtle gets to the finish line, and it's probably surprised to see that the finish line ribbon is still intact. And so it breaks through it, throwing everybody's assumed answer of that win out, as the tortoise was the one to win the race. The slow-moving turtle never gave up, and in the end, it was how it won. The end. That classic story is number 226 in the official listing of Aesop's Fables, a collection of stories written by Aesop, who was thought to be a slave and storyteller in ancient Greece around 620 and 564 BCE. The likes of Aristotle and Plutarch, great thinkers of the time, note this famous narrator, and these stories continue to stay with us today. As a child, it was stories like this from Aesop and others that fueled my imagination and taught me values with real life meaning. For example, I was thinking about this the other day. I have an athletic letter, an academic jacket. I pulled it out ahead of time to show you. See, there's my letter jacket with that big E on the back showing Epping. Some of you might have these as well, probably buried deep in your closet like mine was. What this reminds me is that I also won a race, but not as expected. You see, I played varsity soccer, and some of you know this. I played for 11 years with schools, but I was not the hare in the story. I was not the rabbit at all. I have exercise-induced asthma, and that meant that I was much closer to that turtle. Sometimes we would be practice running, and I would still be on that first lap while the really fast kids passed me by their second. But thanks to stories like the tortoise and the hare, I knew part of the challenge was keeping on, keeping on. Our Bible has similar messages to this. 1 Corinthians 9:24 says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize." And in Galatians 6:9, "Let us not become weary for doing good, for at the time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Do you hear the message in all of this so far? Do not give up. It seems like an important message right now. One of the biggest challenges we've ever faced, we face right now. But there are messages for us like 2 Peter 2:9. The Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials. Or Galatians, that one, again, hold on to that. Doing good, not giving up. This can be our hope that can keep us going in the midst of this when the wind gets knocked out of us. Earlier, I said the word myth. when we're thinking about fables. Using that term doesn't mean it's not real. A myth, in definition terms, in the traditional sense, is a story of an earlier history of people that concerns some kind of natural or social phenomenon, something that can teach us a lesson. Our Bible is full of myths, stories that are set to inspire and encourage and teach us. Traditional stories that have a meaning for now as well as then. Last week we talked about Moses and the Israelites in the desert for 40 days. We said that 40 days was a long time. Well, Moses isn't the only 40-day story. There's others, and there's one I was thinking about today. Because you see, throughout this week, some of you have expressed that you're concerned about the fact with the governor saying that we are to stay in our houses to May 4th. Well, if you do the math, May 4th is around 40 days away, and that does seem like a long time. It'll be a challenge for us to stay that length of time. Be able to stay in our homes unless essential needs and jobs dictate otherwise. Now, your house might feel confining, but at least you're in your own home. Let me tell you a myth story about one who had to stay that long in a place, and it wasn't their own home. There was a man, and his name was Moses, and he was in the desert. We talked about that, right? But there's an even greater story that's even more treacherous, because Moses at least was around people. But what about Noah? You see, that's also a 40-day story. It says of Noah that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Now, Noah is going to face quite a challenge for his 40 days. One of the most serious is he's going to be stuck on a ship with animals of every type, and his own family for 40 days. Honestly, I don't know which is worse for him. The smell of the elephants, the fear of the lion, getting hungry, or being stuck on a vessel with his entire family. And I say that with complete love of family, but I know that's a challenge itself, right? This story is meant to make us rethink our challenges. This is how God kept Noah safe. He placed him in a situation to protect him. Just like we are being asked to do now. Stay inside. Why? Well, for Noah, it was because the world was in a flood. Now, I know one of the problems with this story for many people, including myself, is that it's a scary story more than anything else. If you look at the perspectives of others than Noah, this is a rough time in the world. But I want to tell you that this story is not unique to Christianity or Judaism. That in fact, we know for the truth because right now in the British Museum in London sits a tablet called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's a story very similar about a flood. In that story, there are days of flood that the gods decided upon. There's a hero that has to build a ship. There's birds released and animals on board. Very similar. I'll post it actually on our Facebook later and you can read it. But one thing about this is that it doesn't make the Noah story not true. What it's showing is that throughout the world there was a fear of water overtaking. Just like we have a fear right now of viruses overtaking, different time periods throughout history have had different concerns. And stories have been written and told over and over again and lived to show us that we can get through anything, even our greatest fears. Now, one of the big differences between the Epic of Gilgamesh and our Noah story is that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero does all this, goes on that boat, takes that journey because he wants eternal life. Well, Noah isn't really doing this for immortality himself. We know that's part of something we get from our connection to God. But Noah, what he's doing is because he's being faithful. He's following God's promises and knows that God will protect him. The story is told to give hope. Now, if you were just to type hope into the Google dictionary, you're going to get a definition, but under it, it's going to say something like the archaic definition of hope means a feeling of trust. A feeling of trust. Don't you like that? I do. This idea that we, like Noah, can have a feeling of trust with God no matter what we face. It says in the Bible, the Lord then said to Noah, "Go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal." He's going to go on to say that there needs 7 kinds of birds and that they're going to be kept safe as the rest of the world perishes. It says 7 days from now I will send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And it also says a little bit later, and Noah did all that God commanded. Building the ark before the rain even showed up. Now that's hope. That's trust. That's faith. Being prepared to stay inside your houses is going to require a lot of the same stuff. To that, in the midst of the storm going around you, trusting God. While it got dark outside, while the situation was dreary, inside the ark God was found, lived, and trusted. Now some of you were thinking, but I am too old for this stuff, Shannon. But let me remind you, it says in the Bible that Noah was 600 years old when the floodwaters came. Friends, none of us are too old to weather this. Have hope, have trust. And you know, I'm preaching this to myself right now too, because it's hard to remember some of this stuff, isn't it? But it says in our Bible that God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and the livestock that were with him in the ark. And he set wind over the earth, and the waters receded. And after 40 days, Noah opened a window. Noah opened a window. A window is a metaphor for a new beginning. And that's what happens. God says, I have a covenant with you. How do we know that? Because God said it very clearly. This is the sign of my covenant. I am making between me and you and every living creature a covenant for all the generations. And what is that covenant? I've set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on earth. I've actually found it kind of interesting lately. In our dining room, we have some of these little shiny things in the window, and I've noticed a couple times that rainbows have fallen on my loved ones' heads while we're eating. And they've always probably been there, but right now it's taking a different stance in my mind. And I invite you to look for those rainbows, maybe literally seeing some of those rainbows, or just those moments of promise in your own life right now where God is living into that with you. God is present with you. I wonder, and I know this is a strange question, and we won't get an answer for it, but I wonder how many times did Noah think, man, maybe it would just be better if I get off this boat. I'd rather take my chance out there. But he didn't. He didn't give up. He didn't give in. And we can't either. He knew God was with him. Okay, I know you're all saying, Pastor Shannon, that's great, and it's a good biblical story, but that was a long time ago. How does this relate to us today? Well, I have one that's not too long ago. That's a very similar story. Let me tell you about a more recent example. You've probably heard of D-Day, but you may not know the whole story. As one survivor who grew up in Normandy said, people spoke about the landings and the liberators, but we haven't spoken until now of this daily living. Living a life like hidden rats in a humidity and dark with death, pestilence, and lice. There were births, deaths, underground hospitals, kitchens, a real subterranean life. It had been underestimated until now. What is he talking about, you're thinking? He's talking about Caen. Caen is this crucial city during the war that was right on the river, was garrisoned by German troops, right in the midst of Normandy. And the thing about this town, this city, was it had 60,000 people. 60,000. But the Allies knew that they had to take this city if they were going to take out the Germans. So they began to think about that loss of life, of innocent women, children, the elderly, and if it was worth it. They decided that they were going to bomb it anyways. At dawn on D-Day, June 6, 1944, the bombings and shelling began, lasting more than 2 months long. 10,000 tons of Allied bombs fell on this one spot. 3/4 of the city were destroyed completely. Now, sure, it says that Allied planes before this all started dropped some leaflets before the raid saying, "The vital objective near which you find yourself will be continuously attacked. Leave now. You don't have a minute to lose." Can you imagine getting one of those papers? Where would they go? All of Normandy was about to be destroyed. This was their home. The city was decimated. But in the midst of all the building rubble, when they did the check, only 2,000 people had died. Now that number is very high, and it's a sad number. But do you remember what I said, how many people were in the city before? 60,000. Where were all the rest of the people? They were in the quarries that their ancestors had built underneath the city. Caen is famous for its limestone. They've used it in places that you've heard of before, like the Tower of London or Westminster. Centuries before, their ancestors had dug out the entire earth below. There were tunnels and caves. People fled to the work of their grandparents when they were afraid. It says they lived with cold, with fear. Some were sick. There was a lot of respiratory diseases. Some conditions were very difficult. There was a lack of food. There was stress. Those who went outside to get food risked getting killed or hurt. Sound familiar? Underground, they were safe from the bombing. One cave alone held 10,000 people. Now, people stayed underground for weeks at a time. Some people would venture upstairs and out into the earth, but they knew the Nazis were there, the bombing was there, so every chance they had above ground was dangerous. If they were lucky, it says they slept on mattresses, otherwise it was straw or wood shavings. One survivor remembers, "We slept as we could. There were lice, bedbugs, fleas, cockroaches." But they lived. It was hard to stay in. Can you imagine it? But they did. And the Allies took back that city, and they found the people. And when they opened those cave doors, it was like a window opening, just like it was for Noah. A window onto a new path for Europe and for the world. I learned about Caen from a Normandy episode on Expedition Unknown, and I would recommend that episode, but otherwise just look for it online to find out more about this cave system. It's a part of history we need to remember. The people lived while the war ravaged above them. Noah survived while the flood surrounded him. I know it's tough and scary right now, friends. I know we normally live a certain life that's more like that rabbit in the story at the beginning, where we're fast-paced, we're moving all the time, but right now we're being called to be like those turtles who keep on keeping on. We can do that when we remember God's promises are fulfilled. When we hear in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." We have a window that will open. We have allies to get us out of this. We can make it to the end of the trial. We just have to keep trusting God and know that hope is on the horizon. God bless you all, my friends. If you need me, I'm here. Otherwise, call each other, and most of all, love each other. Amen.